Welcome to our 13th Character Evolution Cast episode, everyone. This episode is all about finding inspiration for your characters in your games. But before we get to that, we've got some announcements, including something that we are very excited to announce.
First up, we are still going to Gen Con. Surprise, surprise. My games of Chimera are still in submitted status.
Also, surprise, surprise. No,
I know, surprise, surprise. Things go a little slow there, but they're slowly getting through that huge backlog that they have. And probably within the next week or two, they should be posted. So we will hopefully be able to update you on those being posted within a couple episodes or so.
That's awesome. We also have a really exciting surprise announcement. I'm so excited for this. I know Ryan wrote words for me to say, and I'm not going to say them because I'm just still like freaking out over here. I'm very excited. We were going to try and keep this a secret a little bit. We were doing our panel with James D'Amato. We were going to do some exercises from his book, and what we were planning on doing is taking some characters from the show that we've made and doing those exercises. We did it at a catacon with our Deadlands characters, but we were going to keep it a secret which characters we were using. However, we can't keep it a secret because we have this really cool announcement to make. So, as I whack my microphone, I'll cut this out. Don't worry about it. Probably I won't. What we were planning on doing was talking about our Spire characters. Very recently, Grant also announced that he was going to be at Gen Con running some playtests of The Heart, which it takes place in that world of Spire. And I was very excited that I got a ticket to. And I thought, hey, you know what's super cool is to just ask things. I always tell people, if you want something, just ask for it. Yeah. Right? So I sent a message to Grant and said, hey, I don't know what you have going on Thursday or whenever our panel is. If Thursday at 2, it's right here in the notes that Ryan typed up for me that I'm not reading. I'm so excited. I'm so nervous and I'm so excited. But I reached out and said, hey, we were planning on doing these exercises from James's book. We really wanted to do our Spire characters, and I know that you happen to be at Gen Con. If you are free Thursday at 2, would you like to be on our panel since you also have a character? And he said, that sounds awesome. I will be there. So, everyone, if you have not yet purchased a ticket to the Character Creation Cast panel with published author TV's James D'Amato, I would also like to announce that along with James D'Amato, we will also have Grant Howitt, creator of Spire and Honey Heist and Jason Statham's Big Vacation. He will be on our panel, and I'm so excited. There are still lots of tickets available, so please, 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 if you are around Thursday at 2, check it out. We will have 2 very cool guests, and also Ryan and I will be there. So I'm so excited, and I'm so nervous, and I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah,
I'm absolutely thrilled. But again, this is another one of those, hey, if you want something, ask for it. The worst people can do is say no. And also, they might blow your freaking mind. So...
Yeah,
I'm a little bit giddy about this.
And I was a little disappointed because I wouldn't have had any time to actually meet Grant in person, probably at Gen Con. And so you doing that allows me to meet him, and I am over the moon for that too, because he's a pretty cool guy. Yes, yeah. Oh, I'm so excited. So definitely, please, even if you don't care about our show, which I don't know why you're listening to this cold open, if you don't care about our show, but if you do care about Grant Howitt, he will be on our panel. Okay, I'm so excited. We'll put some links to that in our show notes. Yeah, we will. And we'll also announce it on Twitter for people that aren't listening to this who probably don't care that we're going to announce it on Twitter because they didn't listen to any of this. That's true. Ryan, do you want to finish doing the rest of this cold open? Oh, that's so fun. Well, you know what else makes us super happy? Maybe not as happy as Grant Howitt being on our panel at Gen Con. Reading your reviews. We currently only have 2 reviews in the bucket, and actually after this cold open, we will only have 1 review. So if you have a chance, please leave us a rating and review at Apple Podcasts or any of the other sites listed in our show notes. Not only will we love reading them, they will really help us out a great deal in getting this show to more people. And we'll also read your reviews right here during our cold opens, like we are about to do for JRPG from the United States of America from iTunes.
They left a review titled, "Great Podcast." In an ideal world, I would play every single RPG out there, but in reality, that's impossible. I just don't have that kind of time, so I have to be extra judicious with my choice of games. That's why Character Creation Cast has become one of my favorite podcasts. Their informative and in-depth dive into the character creation process of RPGs is a fantastic way to judge whether or not a specific game is for me. I decided to try Traveler and Blaze in the Dark just because of them. On the same note, I don't really like the episodes where the creator of the game is also a guest. They can't be objective or critical of the game they're discussing, so it ends up feeling a lot like a promotion. Most of the episodes are not like that, however, and so most guests are great at pointing both what makes a game great, but also what makes it flawed. That makes for the most interesting discussions, in my opinion. I strongly recommend the show. Well, thank you, JJJJJRPG. And thank you for the constructive criticism. That's very helpful.
I was listening back to our Spire episodes in preparation for this Character Creation Cast panel. And I did notice that when we asked Grant what the biggest flaw of the system was, he said, if anything, it's too evocative. So, I mean, there may be a point to this.
Yeah, there's...
I think that the creators can offer like different views on like why they made those choices that some other people can't, but definitely, yeah, they aren't always as objective as some of the podcasters and stuff that we talk to. So I think it definitely goes both ways, and I can see that. If anything, it's too evocative. All that said, we're still going to have him on our panel.
Exactly.
All right. Well, with all of that out of the way, please enjoy the episode.
Yeah. Welcome to Character Evolution Cast, everyone, a show where we discuss what to do with all those characters we just made. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan, and today my co-host Amelia and I are sitting down to talk about finding inspiration for your characters and your games as a whole.
On our regular episodes, you'll notice that we often take inspiration from the game itself or from the people around us in building our characters, but sometimes it isn't that simple. It can take a bit of effort to feel truly connected to the character you're creating. This is especially true when you're considering how you want to play a character in a game, and even more true when you're looking at playing that character for a long time.
So why do we need inspiration? Despite the fact that we are making our own characters most of the time, it can be difficult to translate the choices we make in the process, narrative or mechanical, into a sense of who a character is as a person.
I think this is something that we've discussed a number of times when we're kind of going through the process. We've talked about how, like that point in character creation where a character goes from a block of stats to feeling like a person. And I know in my experience, a lot of times it's when you start to pick like flaws for those characters. That's really the point where I start to latch on to like what things challenge this person? Like, what are the things that are holding them back from what they really want to do? But I also think that sometimes, even when you've picked those flaws, it's hard to kind of, to like mash those in with the mechanics and build this like cohesive person. And a lot of times there are mechanics associated with those disadvantages, depending on the game. Sometimes all disadvantages have the same sort of mechanical value, and some of them are different and like apply to certain situations or whatever. But I think translating the information that you see onto paper into how you role play a character is really complicated and can kind of take a while. I know I think I've talked about it on the show before that I sometimes have trouble in one-shots because I feel like personally, even going through the process of like some of the things that we're going to talk about, it takes me a little bit to kind of get a feel for who a character is. And after the first session, I usually kind of start to get there. But going from these are the steps that I've gone through, and now I've made this character, to I know who this person is, can be really complicated. And so I think going through the process of pulling from different things and the things that we're going to talk about later to find that inspiration to really make them into a 3D character can be really helpful.
Yeah, and it makes me think of the times when I go to conventions and when we sit down and play pre-generated characters and stuff. Those type of characters are, you know, they're mechanically all done for you. They have a little bit of backstory with them. Here it is, go. And you can have a character that you make at home going through the motions of creating all the mechanics, and maybe it has a little bit of backstory built into the character creation. But then when it gets time to your character's all done, it's all on the paper. Well, who is this person as an actual person?
Yeah, I think there's the sense a lot of times that if you're not playing a pre-generated character, if you went through the process of character creation, that you are immediately feeling a connection with that character. And I don't think that that's always true. And I think there's a tendency sometimes to feel kind of frustrated by that and to say, like, you know, is it the game? Did I just like not make a good character? Did I not? And I don't think that is always the case. I think that sometimes it's just that creating that whole picture, it hasn't been done yet. It's like when you read a book and you read one chapter, you know, you've got a description of this person. You kind of have started to see how they interact with the people around them in the world, but that isn't the full character, right? And so I think character creation gives us that first chapter of a book. And using some of these other inspiration techniques, or whatever you want to call them, that we're going to talk about, can kind of help you flesh out the rest of that novel.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you're coming from a game like D&D, where creating the character is almost entirely a mechanical sort of deal, where you pick a class, you pick a race, and you roll stats, and then you pick abilities and skills and all that sort of stuff. That doesn't exactly tell you much about the character unless you're actively thinking about it in the process.
Yeah, there are absolutely games that lend themselves to inspiration and to helping you kind of build that personhood a little bit more than others. There are certain ones that you walk away saying, okay, I have a sense of this person's place in the world and their idea of themselves. But there are also lots of games that don't do that. And I think that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't want that in your game.
Absolutely.
And I think that leads us to another reason that you would want to kind of find that inspiration, is that when you are feeling inspired by your character, it can increase your attachment to a game, and it can make you feel more engaged with what's happening at the table, what's happening in the story, what's happening with the characters around you, depending on how you build those connections. I think that feeling attached to your character makes going to sit down and play that game much more fun. I know you and I have talked before about situations we've been in where we've played characters that we just weren't really feeling. And like they didn't have that inspiration. We didn't feel attached to them or like particularly invested in them. And it leads to a gaming experience that is less than ideal. And so being able to pull from sort of all of these other elements and give yourself inspiration and build that attachment and build this full fleshed out person can really make your gaming experience a lot better.
Absolutely. And even when you go to sit down and play this character, when you have all of that inspiration behind you, you'll find that the role playing actually comes easier too.
Absolutely.
You won't have to struggle to say, well, what will my character think or say in this situation? You'll be more in that character's head when you've had that proper sort of inspiration.
Absolutely.
And one of the other things that is great about inspiration is when you get those sort of light bulb moments.
Where everything just sort of like clicks into place and you know what it is that you want and who this is. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's an absolutely great feeling. And inspiration sources of inspiration can definitely help you get to those sorts of moments.
Definitely. I've had times where going through character creation, I come away feeling like, okay, I think I've got an okay sense of who this is. And then as I do a little bit more, what James D'Amato calls personal play, doing some of those things by yourself away from the table, you kind of have this moment of like, oh, no, now I get it. And it's not always like a huge directional shift from the character that you built at the table, but suddenly it like I said, it just sort of clicks into place. It's like things were sort of loosely there, and now it's like, okay, I know what this is. Everything works the way I want it to, and it's such an awesome feeling. And I've gotten to feel it sometimes on our show. Like we've had those moments of, oh, yes, I know what this is. But it doesn't always come just through the character creation process. Sometimes you need that little extra push. So hopefully some of the things that we talk about today can give you a better idea of where to go to seek out some of those things. I'll start by saying this is by no means a complete list. No. These are things that I think Ryan and I have sort of done, or things that we've talked to people about and have found to be helpful for ourselves or for people around us in games that we've played in. I would love to hear what your thoughts are. If there's things that we didn't talk about that have been super helpful to you in making things come together, I would love to hear about them, because I'm always really excited to hear how people engage with their characters and how people like have those aha moments. Because I know talking to people, and I just started playing in a campaign recently, another L5R game, but going through character creation and kind of like looking at things ahead of time, like what I want to do and that kind of stuff. Another player was like, oh, I know exactly what I want to do. I have these 3 story hooks that I think would be good for a character. So this is character A, character B, character C. And these are their hooks. And right away, like they knew what they wanted to do. And I was like, I have no clue who this person is. I don't I'm just not connecting. And it was like, I know that I want to play this class because I think that the mechanics are really cool and I like some of the lore around it, but I just can't like sink my teeth into who this character is. And so starting to go through the processes of some of these inspiration things has been really helpful until I finally have a moment of like, aha, I know who this person is. I know what their desire in the world is. I know what their conflicts are. And it feels really cool. But like I said, for some people it clicks really fast, and for some of us it doesn't. This is always a struggle I have, especially, like I said, when it comes to playing a campaign, because I feel like there's more pressure to get it right. Whereas like one shot, it's like, oh, I'll play it. If it doesn't work, great. Like I tried something new, and in a campaign, I'm like, no, I have to figure it out.
It has to be perfect right away, right?
Well, and not that character growth doesn't happen, because I think like who a character starts out as at the beginning of a campaign is never who they end as.
Yeah.
But you do need to have that solid foundation of like, this is a character I'm interested in portraying too. So.
Yeah, I would say that a character is closer to perfect when they have that room for growth.
Absolutely.
Well. And when you're starting a campaign, especially, it's a lot more important to have room to grow for your character instead of like in a one-shot where, it's like a cannon. It's just going to go off and break everything, and then it's done.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. And I think that having a better grasp on what you want that story to be, like what your kind of long-term goal is for your character, like what is the thing that they strive for? And knowing that going in can be really helpful. And so I think taking some of these tips that will give people kind of gives you a better idea, right? Like helps, like I said, flesh them out, make them a 3-dimensional person. And so that you can really get a better sense of what it is that you're looking for when you sit down. So now we're going to go ahead and get into our list. We have a few big, broad kind of categories and broad ideas. And so, as you've probably noticed, it's just Ryan and I. We should have mentioned that at the beginning, probably. But, now that you're 15 minutes into this, we haven't introduced a guest. There is no guest. So Ryan and I are just going to kind of chat about how these things have worked for us or people that we know. And we will have links to most of it in the show notes as best we can. And we're just going to talk about how these things have helped us and how we think that they can help you.
Yes.
All right. So the first one I want to talk about, this is probably my favorite one, which is why when I did the outline, I put it first because I was typing and it's about me. Pinterest. I assume most people know what Pinterest is, whether you've used it or not. I only recently, probably in the last year and a half maybe, started using it for aesthetic type things. Before that, I had used it kind of as inspiration for home decor, and I save a lot of cupcake recipes on there. If you look at my Pinterest, there's a lot of cupcakes, activities for my kids, craft stuff. But I've also started really embracing it for the aesthetic side of things, of just photography and landscapes and art and things like that. And I've found huge amounts of inspiration. So I'm not sure how much I've talked about this on the show. I know I talk about my mental health a lot of different places. But one of the, I guess, symptoms of some of my various disorders is that I have sensory processing issues. So it means that textures are really weird for me. I'm very particular about them. Sounds are very overwhelming for me. But along with that comes the fact that visual cues are hugely important to me. Colors and looking at textures and things like that are really powerful to me. Yeah. And because of that, I am also a very visual learner and I'm a visual thinker. So being able to pull photos of things or art of things that kind of has even the color scheme or patterns or a rough layout or just something kind of close can help me really visualize what I want something to look like. So, for example, we talked about it when we did our Catacon episode. Yeah. When we sat down to play Descent into Midnight, I looked at Devin and said, what is the color scheme for this game? And I then, after the game, went through and kind of created a Pinterest board that reflected a lot of that color scheme in underwater settings. Yeah. And that has really helped that game stick with me.
That's awesome.
For an L5R game, I went through and I made, because now you can do sections of boards. I made a board for the game, and then I made sections for each character. I made one for the setting. I made one for our clan, all different kinds of things that are pictures of landscapes and art and sort of little pieces of information about each character and little bits that were important. So what does their clothing look like? What are their hobbies? What kind, even just how do you feel about them? This comes in handy when you're doing things, and we'll talk about this later on, commissioning art too, because you can kind of get an idea of what you want your character to look like. So in mine, I did a lot of pinning of this is the sort of hairstyle that this person wears. This is, sort of the shape of their face, all that kind of stuff. And it just helps me get a better picture of what that character looks like, what that world looks like, so that when I sit down at the table, I can start describing some of those aspects of things and have better terminology and a better sense of what it is. So rather than sitting down and saying it's blue, I've looked up all kinds of pictures of all these fabrics and things like that. So I can say it's a silk and it has sort of this rippling quality and, all of these kinds of things, because they're things that I've seen. Yeah. And I will, like I said, we'll put links in there. We have one for our show. I have gone through and painstakingly for most of our series. I've gone through and I've created boards. So I don't have one for our last Mouse Guard series yet. But there's a board for the previous ones, kind of with aesthetic inspiration and just kind of general ideas and things that felt right to me about our characters or the setting or the worlds that we created. So you can go through and take a look at those. They're not super hefty, I should say. They all, only have 10 or 11 pins. I'll probably keep going as I feel so inclined. But I also, in the show notes, will put links to some of my personal ones that I've made for games that I've played in too.
Yeah, and I haven't gone that all out using Pinterest myself. And I know some Pinterest super users out there, like my wife, has like thousands of boards and pins and all sorts of stuff. No, I only have dabbled in finding character creation or character art for my characters when I was trying to start playing Heroes Unlimited again and Palladium Fantasy again with my local friends. And I didn't really care to go into those subcategories or anything like that for like, you know, fantasy, humans, elves, dwarves, etc. I just had 4 boards created. Male fantasy aesthetic, female fantasy aesthetic, male modern aesthetic, female modern aesthetic. And it was more if they blended the lines, if a certain character art was more ambiguous, it would go in both boards.
Okay.
So either male, female, ambiguous, it could have gone to either of those if it was like pure fantasy. If it was something that was fantasy-esque, but could also belong in like a modern superhero campaign, it would also go in the modern.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I was
able
able
to organize the things like basically any way that you want.
Yeah.
Like I said, I know that some of mine had subboards for like the different characters in the game. So like I would make them for other players and stuff like that too.
Absolutely.
And that's the beauty of something like that is you can kind of organize it how you want. But I was just really surprised at like the different things that I found inspiration in too.
There's so much. Yeah, and now if I'm ever going to be like going into like a serious campaign or anything like that, I've got this repository of just character art, different poses, different weapons, different armors, different superhero suits, all sorts of different styles of art. So like, you know, brush strokes and actual like whatever colored pencil, everything, digital art and all that sort of stuff. So there's just all these blends of aesthetics, and I can just scroll through my list of hundreds of photos of this art and be like, well, this kind of looks like my character and this kind of looks like my character. And then I can take those and now I've got kind of a good visual of what my character actually more closely looks like. Yeah, it's really interesting when you go into these like huge Pinterest boards through searching and whatnot and just finding everything that you want to get, you know.
It's like a deep rabbit hole.
It's so...
Especially because now, like, when you pick one, it'll show, like, if you scroll a little bit down, it'll be like, here's similar things. And you're like, oh my God, I'll be here forever.
Yeah, hundreds and hundreds of similar things. And then you click on one of those and it gives you more similar things. And what's really cool about that is you can refine a look for your character that way easily too. Be like, well, this kind of looks like my character. Well, I'm going to click it. Well, here's a bunch of things that kind of look like that. Oh, well, this one, 2 pages down, this one looks more like my character. And then you click into that, and now you've got a whole bunch more that probably even more look like what you were picturing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it goes deep.
Yeah.
But like I said, as a very visual person, that's been hugely helpful to me just because I like to be able to picture the world that I'm playing, and I like to picture the people around me and the aesthetic and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And even just thinking in like color schemes and stuff. You think about like movies. I always go back to Shape of Water, if you've ever seen that movie, that there's very strong color tones in that movie. And I try to think of my games sort of in that way too, of like, what are the tones of this game? And so going through and just being able to pick pictures that fit that kind of thing and put them in a collection can really help inspire you and help you figure out exactly what it is that you're looking for.
Yeah. And what's really cool is that Pinterest allows you, if you don't want like all of your pins to just be wide open to the entire internet, you can actually lock the boards that you want to have locked, and then only you have access to them. So if you're pinning like a bunch of character art and maybe you don't want the rest of your party, looking at stuff that is on your Pinterest boards for like, I don't know, maybe you're a GM that's looking for different NPC type inspiration.
I will say when I was doing it for an actual play podcast, that was a thing. It was like I locked the board because we as a group wanted to be able to pin things. And I, like shared the board with the other members of our group so that they could pin things too if they wanted to. But we didn't want the broader worlds to go and stumble upon my Pinterest board and figure out exactly like what we were up to. Exactly. So we definitely locked that board.
Yeah. So it's really cool what you can do with Pinterest.
Yeah, absolutely.
So another really great source of inspiration, and one that I thoroughly enjoyed doing, was playlists, music playlists. Yeah, we did this for our Starcross characters. And after those playlists were done, it just blew my mind how much, like, how good it felt to listen to those.
Perfectly they fit, right?
I know.
When you get those right, it's another one of those, like, light bulb moments, right? Of, like, oh man, this is perfect.
Yeah, exactly. And then when we're picking between songs and trying to put them all on the list and everything, and then we're like, oh, well, this song's absolutely perfect as well. And then somehow, when the songs were lined up in order, they kind of told the story, which was even more cool. So yeah, playlists of songs that fit your characters, or a pairing of characters, like specifically with Starcrossed, we kind of went for what fits the couple.
Yeah, that was super easy because there's plenty of love songs and like songs about longing and
Absolutely. But if you want to do it that fits the tone of the game that you're going for, if it's like peaceful, joyful, or even brooding, or dark and gritty, or if you want like a more cinematic feel of the game that you're going for, or super heroic, there's all sorts of different types of songs out there, and like soundtracks for movies, things like that, that you can pull together to give you a really good idea of how your game is going to feel or how your character feels. You could also pick songs that are lyrically tied to the character or the game, which is really cool. And you can pick songs that maybe it's music that your character likes listening to.
Yes.
As well, which is a really good way to get into a character's head.
Absolutely. I think sometimes making playlists can be a little bit challenging, sort of depending on your music tastes and your knowledge of music, because it can be difficult to find what you're looking for in your music library. For example, if you're playing a fantasy game and your whole music library is old school punk, it's going to maybe be a little bit tough. Not speaking from experience at all.
Yep.
So sometimes that can be a little bit difficult. I have had good luck doing things like picking songs, like I said, that are, lyrically appropriate, or saying like this is a sort of theme that feels correct to my character. So playing a game where like longing was a really big theme of like wanting something that you cannot have, whether that's a person or a job or to leave the place that you're living, whatever that thing is, the sense of longing, and kind of picking up on those themes and then finding songs that are sort of lyrically or emotionally appropriate to that tone can be really helpful. We talked lots of times about having that session 0 and talking about like the elevator pitch of the game. But I know one of the things in our session 0 document too is also like, what is the tone of this game? And so, like, what are the themes? Are the themes family or revenge or things like that? And so once you've kind of discussed some of those too, and sort of honed in on where your character fits in that part, finding songs to further inspire that can sometimes help you get a little bit better of an idea of who they are.
Oh, yeah.
The other thing that I think is really great about playlists is that it's very easy to collaborate with the other people in your group on this project. I've done it for a campaign where we just made a playlist and kind of over time just all added songs that we felt were appropriate either to our characters, to the themes that we wanted to explore in the game, to the tone of the game. And it was a weird mishmash of things, but somehow it all really worked. And I like listened to that playlist nonstop while we were going through that campaign. And it was a lot of fun. you and I collaborated on the Starcross playlist. We went back and forth and said, like, hey, this is a song that I think would fit. I know we talked to other people, too, and said, these are kind of the themes that we have going. We said, like, we've got these sexy spies, and, like, they can't be together, and it's the Cold War. And, you know, we've got these sweet, adorable magic school kids that, like, man, they're just doing their best. And, you know, the tones of those playlists overall feel that way too. Like if you listen to the Magical School Kids one, it's a little bit more hopeful and upbeat, whereas like the some of the songs that I put on for that Sexy Spies one were actually from a Spotify playlist called Femme Fatale. And so like you can pull those tones in, and it really like I mean, I'm really proud of those playlists. I know that we've shared them on our Twitter a number of times too, but if you listen to our Starcrossed episodes and then like kind of listen to those playlists, I think that we did a great job kind of mimicking the feel that we wanted of those relationships. And I think that when you get those playlists right, like anything else, it's like that sort of aha light bulb moment of like, this is the feeling that I want. And music is really evocative in ways that other sources of inspiration sometimes aren't. Because sometimes it's like, oh, this is the thing that I want to mirror or emulate or something like that, whereas music has this really evocative quality and sort of like in some ways is very visceral. And so I think having a playlist for your game, for your character, whatever, and like I said, especially if you can get your group to kind of collaborate on that and it becomes like a project and something that you can all walk away with too, as a shared memory of this situation, can be really really valuable.
Yeah, and I remember growing up, whenever I role-played with my friends, we would always play music during the sessions as well. And we even got it to a point where we had a 51-disc CD changer.
Nice.
And just loaded it up completely and hit random. And we loaded it up with, like, CDs that fit the tone of the game that we were going for. And so having this on in the background, you know, quiet enough that we could still hear it, but, you know, where we could actually talk amongst one another, it was really, really a great aesthetic. So utilizing playlists during your game is a really great way to set the mood for the game and set the mood for the feelings that you'll be kind of experiencing through your sessions. And adding some background music can definitely set the atmosphere for a game. We were mostly playing superhero games, so we had a lot of modern sort of music, and a lot of songs that we cared about and everything. But we also created mixed CDs for our characters. Every player got to choose 2 songs to throw onto the mixed CD. So this one special CD actually had an array of songs that was particularly geared towards our group of characters, which is really cool.
Yeah, and I know that, like, having some kind of background music or something like that sort of tonally fits what you want to go with can also really lend to that immersive experience, too. Yeah. It can make you, it sort of sets the tone in the room, too, not just of the game itself or talking about like themes or something like that, but it can actually physically in the room that you're in say, you know, because like you think about movies and stuff, and you know when there starts to be that ominous music, you sort of start to tense up, you know, like there's a reason that movies have soundtracks. It's to help us feel those feelings. And so doing something like that for your game can help you feel those feelings, can help you feel more immersed in the game too, on top of leading to some inspiration for your character and saying like, okay, now I have a sense of the things that they want and who they are as a person, or like you said, like the music that they like, or any of those kinds of things. Exactly. And, you know, I think if you collaborate with people on a playlist too, you can sometimes just discover new music. Sometimes it's just fun for the sake of fun. And that's very true. You know, I think that there's a lot of advantages to doing something like that. And again, it's a physical thing that you can all walk away with too. You know, that playlist is, you know, on YouTube or Spotify, or if you want to make a mixtape or, you know, a mixed CD or whatever medium you want to use, that's, you know, sort of a more physical thing. I've talked about that a number of times too. I keep saying that in this episode. These are things I've talked about before. But the fact that, you know, you walk away with that shared experience, but this is sort of something more tangible to recognize that experience with too.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be anything as elaborate. Like some GMs out there kind of go all out with music, where they actually queue up different songs and different like tones for the different scenes. And then they go into playing like, okay, we're about to hit this big battle, and then the music's nice and quiet, and then the battle happens, and now it's all super exciting, and throughout the whole battle, there's this epic music going on, and then afterwards, it kind of fades into, you know, like a denouement sort of feel to it. And you don't have to actively be a DJ to have this music on in the background.
No.
If you're capable of doing that, that's really cool. And I don't know of many GMs that have the ability to multitask at that level. But just having a bunch of songs on in the background, it doesn't matter when the songs come up. It adds a lot to the feel to the game. And I think it's a pretty cool experience.
Yeah, and I like using it too, just as a way to kind of keep yourself engaged with a game between sessions too. I think that's a really nice thing about that music, is to sort of keep you in touch with that character or the game that you're playing and the story, whatever, like between sessions. And I would use them sometimes to just sort of like, I don't want to say like get amped up or something like that, but just sort of like get excited about the game, because sometimes after a long day, you're like, oh yeah, it's a game day, but like I'm so tired, and you know, but like it can help you stay engaged in between things. And I think the cool thing about something like a playlist is that you can go as deep or as shallow as you want. You know, if you want 10 songs that are like, this is how my character feels, great. If you want a full cinematic soundscape, you go for it. You do you. You do you.
Do the thing.
Absolutely. So I think that there's a lot there. There's a lot that can be done with them. Another cool thing that you can do to gain inspiration, and this is a thing that I've seen in a lot of books themselves, a thing that role-playing games themselves often suggest, is sort of engaging with genre media.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not even going to apologize for it anymore. L5R. For sure in the 4th edition book. I think in the 5th edition book too. I'd have to double check. But for sure in the 4th edition book, there is a list of books and movies that are suggested reading and suggested watching if you want to understand what this setting is about. And not every game has that. Some do, some don't. But it's a really good way to kind of figure out the tone of a game, to figure out what a character might look like, or the world around them might look like, how characters interact with each other in those settings, because different times, different settings, different worlds, people interact with each other differently. The social cues are different, and the stigmas and things like that. And so kind of engaging in some of that media can help you get a better sense of what this might look like and how your character would fit into a world like that too. I think this is something that also can be done kind of whenever you're creating your character.
Yeah. If you are sort of lost on your concept and don't really know what a character in this setting should look like maybe it's your first time playing a vampire game, or your first time playing a superhero game or a fantasy game or something like that, and you're not familiar with the genre, you can try reading books or watching movies in a similar setting, and you might get an idea of the challenges that certain characters face in those sorts of stories. There's tropes for a reason. Tropes in genre is something that basically is seen time and time again between different pieces of media of the same genre. That's why they call them tropes, is because they're repeated.
Tried and true.
Tried and true. Yeah, they work for that type of genre, because when you utilize A, B, and C tropes, you get a sort of feel that genre is going for.
Well, and often genres are made up of those kinds of tropes. You say,
exactly.
this trope is how we know it fits into this genre, right? I mean, and we can get into like a whole discussion about like film analysis and things like that. So like, don't come at me with my hot trope takes. Those are hot trope takes. But those are an important part of what makes that genre, you know, like the thing about superheroes is we know that there has to be a villain. There has to be something that they're fighting against. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a person. It can be some, you know, catastrophe, or it can be some societal ill or something like that. But they have to be fighting against something, and it has to be something that is either equally powerful or more powerful than them. There has to be that thing that they will overcome in a fight. And, you know, so each genre has those kinds of things. And then you can decide how your character works within those tropes.
Yeah. And it's not to say that you can't play a superhero game where you're literally just playing slice of life superheroes with nothing to fight against. That would be super interesting. But it's always with a backdrop of they have either fought against something in the past, or there's something that they will be fighting in the future. Because that's superheroes. Right.
And then because you've established what those tropes are, the thing that I really like about playing with tropes is that you can decide, do I want to really lean into it? Do I really want to go all out and say, like, this character is all about fighting their nemesis? Yeah. That is the thing that they get up in the morning to do. Or do you want to kind of play against those tropes and say, it is a slice of life thing. This character, like this hero just wants to live their life, and this villain is just obnoxious, and like they don't want to deal with it, but they have to, you know? And so you can kind of play with those tropes and say, like I said, where do I fit in with these things? Do I want to lean really heavily into it? Does that trope sort of define my character arc and the trajectory of this story? Or is that something that I want to push against and say, here's how I'm unique, here's how my story is different?
Yes. And regardless of whether you're going with or against the trope is still kind of technically defining that character.
Absolutely. I think another way to use this kind of media is when you already have a character concept in mind, you can use it to kind of flesh things out and to gather more details about your character or get a better sense of how they fit into that world. I know I've played games where I've said, here's the kind of character that I want to play. Here's kind of what I think their personality is, and I have a really good sense of that. What I don't have a sense of is, what is their story? Like, what does this person want? What does their arc look like? Like, what do I, at the end of the game, where do I want this person to be? Or where does this person think that their life is going?
Yeah.
Because obviously, none of us really know, like, where life will take us. But we all do have that ideal of, you know, here's my life plan, as detailed as it may or may not be. But what I've done in the past is said, okay, I have this personality. Where in media do I see a person that looks kind of like that has similar personality traits or quirks or qualities? What kind of stories are they telling? What are their kinds of trajectories?
Yeah.
And does that match something that I want for my character? And, you know, you won't always find something specific or exact, but you can kind of manipulate those things and say, okay, I see pieces there. So in this particular case, I was playing a character who was sort of very self-absorbed and, you know, really just wanted to like make a name for themselves and really was about sort of the superficial things. And when I looked at it, I realized that a really good analog for that was Sansa Stark. And so I said, like, okay, I really like where her character story goes. I really like the trajectory that she's on. Like, by the end, she is this really powerful person who's learned a lot about herself, but is still ultimately very much that person that she was at the beginning, but she has grown.
Yeah.
You know, she's not completely changed, but she's grown. And so I've said that's the kind of arc that I want this character to have. I want her to get knocked down several times and have to realize that, like, it's not all about you. And so I already had the skeleton of what I wanted that character to be, but now I could say, this is how I want them to interact with the world, and this is the kind of story that I want to tell with this character. And so looking at media can kind of help you find those things. And even if it's not that same genre, because in this case it wasn't, but you can still pull from other pieces of media and say, okay, this is something that kind of matches up with what I want, and it gives me a better idea of something that I can or cannot do.
Absolutely. And one of the other cool things you can do to flesh out the details is when you have a character type in mind, but you don't know how to picture kind of what people of that era or whatever do on a normal basis as this character type, or maybe you're playing a rogue and you want to know what kind of like a rogue looks like when they're doing rogue things. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's media out there with, fantasy rogue types picking locks, sneaking around, wearing cool outfits that make them look all suave and fancy. All sorts of cool little things that you can find in different pieces of media that you can pull together and say, okay, now I can kind of picture how this world looks, and I can picture kind of how the weapons look, and I can picture how the stuff that people wear look, and how certain character types work with those sorts of materials in this sort of time setting. So that way you can actually picture everything a lot better.
I think another thing that you can do with it is kind of pick up on some personality traits.
Yep.
Because even if you have a sense of what you want your character to be, that doesn't mean that I as a person know how to role play that, right? Mm-hmm. So like I could say that I want to have this really sexy femme fatale kind of character. I'm super awkward. Like I try to be really, charismatic and things like that. But if I had to sit down at a table and play like a sexy femme fatale, I would still be really awkward about it. Mm-hmm. But I can sit down and watch a movie like that and say, okay, like I can watch, the body language can help me give an idea of like how to describe this character mm-hmm. in scenes, and, listening to the way that they talk and the things that they say and how they interact with the people around them can kind of give me a sense of like, this is what that kind of person would do. This mm-hmm. is what that kind of person might say. Whereas, Amelia would like stand and wave awkwardly and then just kind of wait for someone else to talk to her. You can have somebody else that sort of sachets up to the bar and like, says some cool, super sexy line that I can't think of right now because that's not who Amelia is as a person. But it can kind of help give you inspiration and mm-hmm. give you some of the, I don't want to say confidence because it doesn't necessarily translate into you feeling more confident about that, but sometimes knowledge is power, mm-hmm. right? And so you can say, I know what this kind of character would do because mm-hmm. I've watched them do it over and over again. I've watched 25 spy movies. I now know what a James Bond type would do. And now I know how to emulate that because I've watched it. Absolutely.
And instead of saying, my character says something sexy and funny right now,
I can maybe have that line, right?
Yeah, and even if you take direct lines from movies, that's perfectly fine.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we all sit around and quote movies all the time. Who says it can't be in character?
Exactly. Right? Yeah, and especially if it's a movie that everybody likes and everybody knows at the table, then that just adds a little bit more fun as well.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So the next piece of inspiration, I talked a little bit about this before with our Pinterest character art, and that kind of goes hand in hand with a subset of what you can use Pinterest for. Mm-hmm. And we mentioned it briefly, but looking at character art for inspiration can be extremely helpful. It can help you narrow down things that you do and really don't like in a character, and kind of the kind of feel that you're going for that character.
Absolutely. There are albums full of character art inspiration on the internet. You can find them on Pinterest. You can find them on on Reddit. I know I've seen links to like full albums of mm-hmm. things. I know all over the place. And sometimes just browsing through can help you get a sense of what you want. And sometimes just clarifying what your character isn't can be really helpful mm-hmm. because I'm a person that suffers from analysis paralysis, mm-hmm. where it's just like the plethora of information in front of me is too much and I just can't. Yeah. And so sometimes being able to just narrow things down and say, well, it's definitely not that mm-hmm. is enough to start that brain process, to start thinking through like, okay, well, if I know that this character doesn't, isn't a redhead, doesn't have freckles, whatever, I've narrowed it down at least somewhat. Yep. And so you can start to figure things out and kind of get a grasp on what this person looks like. And I really do, again, I am a very visual person, but I really do think that having an idea of what a character looks like really helps you inhabit them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And one of the things that you want to keep in mind is if you're going for a certain, I guess what I want to say maturity level for your character, it's really easy to dive into some of these boards and get into some really not really family friendly sort of stuff. So you got to be a little careful.
Ryan, everyone who listens to this show has been on the internet.
I know.
They know what's on the internet. They don't need your content warning.
No, I'm just saying, it's really easy to go down these rabbit holes of all these different character types and then get kind of pigeonholed into a bunch of stuff that you're not looking for. If you want more realistic type character art, there are specific boards out there that have specifically, like, this is realistic armor that women would have worn back in the medieval times versus this is what people think is sexy armor, right, comparatively. So if you want a more realistic view of what your characters can look like, you definitely have a lot of options out there to go to those boards that are more historically accurate.
Fair.
That's all I was trying to say.
Okay.
But another thing you can do for character art is you can also consider commissioning an artist.
Absolutely.
If you have at least an idea, a general sense of what your character looks like, there are a lot of artists out there that can take inspiration from either pictures, if you have pictures that you were inspired by for your character. If you have specific descriptions, those are great for artists. But sometimes artists that you work with will just say, give me as much detail as you can. And if you want, I can roll with the rest of it and give you my interpretation of what I'm thinking.
Absolutely. And I think that's a cool thing about artists too, is that they often think in ways that, us non-artists do not. And the couple times that I've been able to commission character art has come back and it's been like, wow, I didn't even, like, how did you know that I wanted that? Because I didn't know I wanted that,
Exactly.
I mean, and I've only been able to do it a couple times, but every time I've done it, I've just been like blown away and like absolutely floored because it's like you captured exactly what I wanted. And, like I've been able to kind of give descriptions and sometimes some inspiration pictures and things like that. But what they come back with is so much more cohesive and whole than like the, couple little inspiration photos of haircuts that I sent, like here's a Target ad of the kind of sweatshirt I'm wearing. Like, how did you make that into a person?
Yeah, and I recently commissioned a character from the Edifice series that we did.
Oh my gosh, it's so good.
Oh, it is so good. And like literally, I had very little to go off with this person's look. Right. She, if you're not familiar, her name was Iridescent or Iriana Descence. Eerie for short, because she's a musical performer. She wears an iridescent dress, right? And she has some sort of old tech instrument. That's about all the description that I could glean from our episodes.
Right. And we didn't even really talk about like what old tech looks like.
Exactly. And so I gave the artist that description plus a little bit of the backstory. And I found a picture. I was looking for like quote unquote alien instruments, right?
Yeah.
And I found a picture of one of the instruments that they used on Star Trek The Next Generation.
Nice.
Which was like this weird looking lute sort of thing. And I'm thinking, well, this looks kind of what I was slightly picturing. So I gave that image to her, and she just knocked it out of the park. Like,
it was absolutely amazing.
Yeah. I think we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well, because it was just remarkable what she came up with. And when you, even if you have just like bare minimum details for your character and you can afford to get it commissioned, go ahead and do that, because that will definitely help inspire what you picture your character as.
Absolutely. And I think, speaking of our Edifice series, Devin is the one who's done 2 of my 3 pieces of character art and has absolutely, again, knocked it out of the park. She's like brilliant. I would have Devin draw every character I make for the rest of my life. But I think that often we think of character art as kind of being out of their price range too, of like something that it's like, oh, that's for fancy people. Yeah. And it can be very expensive depending on how much detail you want and what kind of artist you go with and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there are so many brilliant artists out there on Twitter, and maybe we'll start a thread for some of them to like plug their stuff, because I think like character art is phenomenal, and I've only recently started to be able to do that, and it has totally changed how I look at my games and how I look at my characters. And again, a tangible thing that you can walk away from the game with. It feels really good to be able to have that visualization of what your character looks like. So I think, even if it is just like a quick pencil sketch or something like that, if you can find an artist and you can kind of give them a description and like absolutely 100% go for it. Like do it. I mean, I cannot recommend it enough. And also support artists, man. Like I said, I think that lots of times they have sales, and lots of times, there are lots of opportunities. And like I said, I think artists also have a variety of price ranges too, because they know not everybody can afford, a beautiful $200 painted portrait, exactly. But a lot of them will have an opportunity to do like a line sketch or something like that. And even that is a really great
I've seen those at really good prices. So
yes, absolutely. And so I strongly encourage, and even if it's like a one-time thing, it's, so you can support a really cool artist, you can get really cool character art. I strongly recommend it.
Absolutely. Yeah. It pretty much is transformative for picturing your character when you aren't just looking at other people's interpretations of other people's characters.
Absolutely.
You're looking at an interpretation of your character.
It's so much more personal.
It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's incredible. Do it.
Yes.
Our next category is something that we've plugged several times. Character building exercises, and what we briefly talked about is personal play. Hey, did y'all know there are books for this?
Yeah, there are.
A well-known podcaster, TV's James D'Amato, published author, TV's James D'Amato, has a book of character building exercises. I don't know if we've mentioned it. If you're a one-shot Patreon backer at I think it's like $5 level, in the Secret Archive, you can hear our Catacon live panel where we did some exercises with James from our Deadlands characters. We learned a lot more about Dirge Stranglethorn.
Yep.
He loves murdering and feeling things.
Yeah, it's true.
But also, I remembered today, the day we are recording, and I'll put a link to the show notes, link to it in the show notes, that there is also a YouTube video where myself, James, and Steve Descant of the Session Zero podcast sat down and did some of the exercises with James on the One Shot Twitch stream, which is now archived on YouTube. So you can hear us do some of those kinds of exercises too.
Yeah.
But little simple activities like the ones in that book, and there are lots of books out there. If you're tired of us, plugging James's stuff, even though it is really great. I have the book. It can help you flesh out those little details. And honestly, doing some of those exercises really made me consider things about my character that I hadn't even thought of.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting when you go through those sorts of things in a book, and you're like, well, this is kind of my type of character. Let's see what sort of cool exercises there are for this. Then you just start fleshing out details, and then those kind of steamroll into other details that steamroll into other details. And you can get to a point where you're fleshing out this character's backstory so much that you know so much about them and how they will play. as a character and as a character in a group.
Well, and like I said, in ways that you don't even think of, because I think back to that Acadecon panel. And by the way, if you're coming to Gen Con, we will be doing another one of these panels. This is what our character creation cast panel will be. But James had you do that one about like Wolverine. And it was like, I wouldn't have even thought of the comparison between Dirge Stranglethorn and Wolverine.
No, absolutely not.
Right? Like I wouldn't have even thought about that. But the whole concept of it was like, you know, I'm a loner who's never alone. Right? You know, and so like all of these exercises to sort of talk about like why you push people away, but also why you really want them there. And it really brought a lot of depth to that character that we'd originally just thought of as like, I like murdering and that's why I'm alone, you know? Like
he was very two-dimensional before we all started that.
Absolutely. And we know so much more about him now. But I mean, it, like I said, it really helps you think about things that you didn't think about before. You know, for my character, we did a stupid exercise about like, what kind of horse do you have? You know, like, is your horse fast? Is it reliable? Is it, you know, but these are all things that like probably would come up in that kind of game. But I hadn't even thought to really flesh out other than my horse nightmares.
The horse nightmares.
So, horse nightmares. Poor Arthur. But doing that kind of stuff can really help you get a grasp of who they are and where they come from and why they do the things that they do, which I thought was a really cool and interesting piece of what we did with Dirge was, you know, why is he alone or why does he push people away? What is it that he really wants? Why does he always work alone, but also have this whole team around him that are definitely not his team? He's not here with them, but they're always there. But those are really key details that definitely would come up in a game because you are doing things as a group, you know, so we need to know why he's a loner, but why he's never alone.
Exactly.
And so, but those aren't things that I would have even thought to like map out, you know? So I think doing those kinds of exercises, if you can find them, I'm sure that there are lots of them on the internet, but like I said, we'll plug James's book again, because it really does have a lot of good stuff in it. And so you can really get a cool idea of who this person is and especially how they interact with the other people around them.
Absolutely.
Another thing that I think has been helpful for a lot of people, and I've kind of dabbled in a little bit, is just writing a character backstory. I don't necessarily suggest writing a ton of backstory. It can be helpful to sort of suss out your character's motivations.
Now, this is my personal favorite method for getting to know a character that I make. I've used this for almost every single character that I've done for a campaign, is write a I want to say quick, but it's usually like 7 to 40 pages.
7 to 40?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if you ever listened to, I don't know how much you listen to campaign, but that's like one of my favorite running jokes of the Skyjack stuff is that their ship has somewhere between 12 and 800 crew members. And that's what this feels like, 7 to 40 pages.
Yeah, it's pretty much like that. But it was almost always more for me to get into the character a little bit better. And it was usually about their backstory of how they became what they are now, especially because I dabble in superhero role-playing a lot. But this sort of thing can be a little complicated because you don't want to ask your GM to read like 30 pages of backstory.
Yeah, this is where I get hung up on this kind of stuff is like, don't hand your GM a book. I always hesitate to like give people, we have a whole show about player advice, but I hesitate to give people advice. I don't want to give you like strong, definitely don't do this other than like, don't be a creep. But I don't suggest giving your GM 30 pages of info to read because like, it's kind of just a crappy thing to do. Like, they're already running your game and plotting out your whole game. Don't give them homework.
Now, it can be entertaining, though. And as just a purely, like, you don't have to read this, but if you do, you might enjoy it sort of thing.
It's a fun fanfic exercise.
It is.
I mean, there certainly are GMs that probably really enjoy that. My thought is, like, you can offer it, but, like, don't
expect it to be
Don't
canon.
be offended if they don't.
Exactly. Because GMs are busy, you know?
Right.
They're
plotting the rest of your game.
They are. They're plotting the rest of your game. They're plotting how these 1 to X number of characters are going to all blend their stories together, right? And not only that, they're also thinking on how to react on the fly when they're playing the game. Now, a story can possibly get into the characters' heads a little bit more for your GM. But if every player in a 5-player group has a 30-page story, that's 150 pages that this person has to read.
Right.
That's a lot.
Uncool.
So it's generally best when you're giving like backstory details to your GM to do bullet points of the important pieces that they need to know about. And maybe that'll give them inspiration for NPCs or organizations or whatever that they can use in stories to directly engage your character. But maybe you can write a story for yourself and then make bullet points based off of that. I think that's perfectly acceptable if you have the time to do that. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that can give some cool story hooks for the GM to kind of pull on. And I think that it can make you feel more engaged in the game because it is a little bit more tailored to you as opposed to like making your character off in the corner, coming to the table and then like hoping that the GM can prepare something for these 6 disparate backstories that you've all come up with that you didn't really tell them about, but you had this expectation, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, kind of having those bullet points definitely can be helpful for a GM. And I think some GMs do really want that and is a really valuable piece of a session 0 too, is that they can get an idea of when you create this character, they can start to see, okay, these are the things that you've latched onto. These are the themes that seem to be important. And so giving them a little bit more info on a backstory can definitely be helpful. Just don't, be flexible, man.
Yep. Don't overwhelm your GM. That's probably a good idea.
Yeah. That's generally like a good piece of advice. Don't overwhelm your GM.
Yeah.
I think the other cautionary piece of advice I would give about backstories is to not necessarily get really attached to those specific details. This is a thing that it varies table by table, but in my experience playing games and the way that I prefer to play games is that if it hasn't come up at the table, it is not canon. And so you can have all of these ideas about what you want your character to be and where they came from and all of that kind of stuff, but that may not be how things play out. It may not be the direction that the rest of the players want to go in. It may not be a thing that ever gets addressed in that story. And so if it's something that you become really attached to while doing this personal play process, it can sometimes feel really disappointing when you walk away from the table kind of unfulfilled. And so I always encourage people to kind of be flexible, leave some of that stuff a little bit nebulous. If you want to write your 30-page, 40-page, 100-page backstory, and you want that to be your fanfic around your character, that's totally okay. But I strongly recommend that you recognize it as as a fanfic and sort of like a non-canon thing because it didn't happen in the game. And the game may not play out that way. The GM may have a story in mind. And, all of a sudden these details come out and you want to say, oh, it'd be really cool if that was tied to my backstory. Or, here's this person from my past. Well, that's not how I wrote them in my backstory. That can feel kind of bad. And so I always sort of suggest to leave it nebulous and not get super attached to it. Because I think that can sometimes be disappointing. But on the other hand, if that's a thing that's really important to you, go for it.
Yeah,
you do you.
Yeah, and another really cool thing that I like to do personally is write journals in my character's voice as the game progresses.
That's cool.
I really like going first person with it, and as if they are sitting down after a session and writing out the events of what happened and kind of how they processed it in those moments.
Oh, that's really cool.
And then not only do I then have a record of our sessions, I have a record of our sessions in character voice in this narrative format that I can look back on later and be like, well, that was a cool scene and now I have it written down here.
Yeah. That's really neat. And it gives you like a little bit more ability to say, here's what like my character thought about it too.
Yeah.
Not just how they acted.
Yeah. I did that for the first session of my new D&D group campaign that I'm playing in, and it went over really well. and then I tried to keep up on it, and life just keeps getting in the way at this point. So
stupid adulting.
I know, seriously. So, so I haven't actually been able to keep up on it. We're about like 4 or 5 sessions in, and I'm about 3 or 4 sessions behind on it.
Yeah, there's still time.
There's still time. I've got notes and a fairly okay memory, so maybe I can get to it.
Yeah,
we'll see. But I guess the final piece of inspiration for this episode that we could think of, and we didn't want to make this episode too long, is closet cosplay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is a concept that kind of came up a little bit in our AP Lessons Learned episode for bringing lessons from actual plays to your home group, where we don't all have closets full of costumes, right? That we can just put on for our games. Some people do cosplay for a living, and they could probably just kill it at cosplaying at the table if they really wanted to. But for most of us, depending on the character or the game that you're playing, it might not even be appropriate to do cosplay at that level for it. But sometimes you can pull little things from your closet to simulate the feel of your character.
Yeah, I think that if you are a woman who's trying to play a man or even like a more masculine character, you can try and dress a little bit more masculine. Mm-hmm. You can kind of, so coming to the table, if I'm sitting down to play a man, coming here in like my sundress is fine. Like that works. But sometimes like putting on jeans and a t-shirt and a hoodie can like sort of change how you feel. Mm-hmm. I think I'm a big believer in like dressing how you feel or dressing how you want to feel. Mm-hmm. And so I think kind of doing that also for your character can help you just sort of get into their skin a little bit more. And this isn't so much advice for character creation or something like that, like some of our other stuff was, but this is definitely more for like sitting down at the table and playing your character and sort of getting into their skin and adding to that immersion. Mm-hmm. So if you're playing a big fighter, you can go in the back of the closet and find those really heavy boots that you have back there. If you are playing, a druid or something, man, just take your shoes off. Like,
just go barefoot for a while.
Yeah. Find that flower crown wreath or whatever that you wore to your sister's graduation party. Mm-hmm. Put that in your hair. It can just sort of help you feel a little bit more grounded in that character and immersed in that situation.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't have to be big stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also if you're big into Halloween like I am, you might have a ton of stuff in a chest in your basement of all your Halloween stuff for different costumes and whatnot that you generally only wear at Halloween. So you can maybe have like a prop sword if you're playing in a fantasy game and you're playing a person that uses a sword. Maybe you can just have that either on your person or on the table just to give you that little bit of inspiration. Or maybe a cloak or something like a circlet or a bracelet that when you wear it, you're going to feel more like your character. You're going to feel more in character, more in their shoes, because it's something that either your character would want to wear or actually does wear in the game. And
it's sort of a physical reminder of this imaginary situation.
Yeah, having that physical connection to your character can be really powerful, especially, in certain circumstances. Like, I think there was even an example in the AP episode when somebody talked, they always had like a hat or something that they were holding. And it was actually because the character, when they talked, they would talk holding and reining a hat. And then eventually it got to a point where the hat wasn't there anymore, but they would still make the motions with their hands and it would still connect them with that sort of character.
Yeah, it can kind of, like I said, just be something that sort of grounds you in that situation. And I find that kind of stuff can be really helpful, especially when you're playing remotely.
Yeah.
Because I'm a person that sort of, I tend to feed off of the mood of the room and like the people around me.
Yep.
And when I don't have that at the table connection, sometimes it can be a little bit harder to feel engaged in what's happening and really like present. And so sometimes those physical reminders can be like, oh yes, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm here for. This is who I am being right now.
Yeah, and I'd be willing to bet that, especially this sort of advice, getting into character through these sorts of props and whatnot, can really be learned about a lot from like a LARP community.
Yeah.
Most cities and even small towns or whatever are getting into these local LARP communities. If there's a gaming community at all where you are, chances are there's a LARP community as well, and most likely will be welcome to giving out suggestions on how to better get in character through these sorts of things, because they do it all the time. And I'd be willing to bet that not everybody in their crew is able to afford the best things all the time.
Right. Yeah. Not everybody can do top of the line cosplay all the time. And and I think the point of this too is that it's not necessary always to go all out. And sometimes, like if you're sitting at a table, like sometimes that's not comfortable. Like I don't want to be wearing a full suit of armor while I'm sitting down to play my D&D game for 6 hours.
Exactly.
But kind of having those little reminders to help you just kind of feel that way can be really helpful.
Well, and it even extends to dice. A lot of people have specific dice sets for specific characters, and only that character uses those dice.
Yeah, we don't know anything about that. Not recently, anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
We gotta get back on that. I mean, hopefully we've given a lot of advice. This episode's ended up longer than I thought it would. But hopefully in all of this, everybody can kind of find something that works for them, or, some kind of play on these things. And I strongly encourage you to pick one and give it a try. I think that all of these have value sort of in their own ways. And, like anything else, not everything's for everybody, but I do strongly encourage you to give one of them a try. And if you do something else for inspiration that we didn't talk about here, please let us know. I would really love to hear where y'all draw your inspiration for your characters and your games and your gameplay. I love hearing about this kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can hit us up on our Twitter or send us an email or whatever. We're always willing to listen and talk with all of you about all this sort of stuff. And if you have questions, hey, hit us up and we'll see if we can find the answers for you.
Definitely. And like I've said several times, check out our show notes because I put a lot of links in there to our playlists and Pinterest boards and all that kind of stuff. So I think that you can hopefully out of all of that find something that helps you out, because I really think that there's a lot of opportunity to just really up your experience here.
And let us know if it does, because we would absolutely love to hear that too.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you try any of these things or have tried any of these things and they've really just wowed you, please let us know. I love hearing about people's really great experiences and things that worked for people.
Well, we don't have a guest, so we can't say, hey, where can we find you online?
Ryan, where can we find you and what kind of stuff are you up to?
Oh, this is
Let's
awkward.
Let's plug ourselves.
All right, fine.
All right. Hey, we put in the work here.
You can
Ryan, what are you up to and where can people find you?
Hey, you can find me online at Lord Neptune on Twitter. You can find me on lordneptune.com to get to my various projects. I am working on Chimera RPG, which is a Powered by the Apocalypse game where we actually, quote unquote, blend genres together. Which is very applicable to one of our points here today. And you can find that at Chimera RPG online. And there's also an audio drama that I'm working on at Side Heroes Pod on Twitter. So a lot of fun stuff.
This is why you don't have time for your journaling.
I know, exactly. How about yourself, Amelia? Where can people find you online and what are you interested in? I mean, what are you currently doing?
Right now or in general? I am on Twitter at Ginger Reckoning, and my other podcast, Garbage of the Five Rings, that I do with my friend Jude Vase, where we dig into the old AEG era lore of Legend of the Five Rings and are just not very nice to it. You can find that show at G5R Podcast on Twitter or at garbageofthefiverings.com.
We're such good hosts / guests.
Yeah, we are. Well, Ryan, thanks for joining us. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Amelia. This was great.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me, too.
Right. We'll be back next week.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Character Evolution Cast, like Character Creation Cast, is a production of the One Shot Podcast Network and can be found online at www.charactercreationcast.com. Head to the website to get more information on our hosts and guests, or even find some of our character sheets. Character Creation Cast can be found on Twitter at CreationCast. I'm one of your hosts, Amelia Antrim, and I can be found on Twitter at Ginger Reckoning. Our other host, Ryan Bolter, can be found on Twitter at Lord Neptune. Music for this episode is used with a Creative Commons license, or with permission from the podcast it originated from. Further information can be found within the show notes. This episode was edited by Amelia Antrim. Further information for today's guest can also be found in the show notes. Thanks for joining us. And remember, we find that the best part of any role-playing game is character creation. So go out there and create some amazing people. We'll see you next time. Now we gotta read some show blurbs.
Show blurbs.
Show blurbs.
Show blurbs.
Show blurbs. Character Creation Cast is hosted by the One Shot Podcast Network. If you enjoyed our show, visit oneshotpodcast.com, where you'll find other great shows like Asians Represent.
Asians Represent celebrates Asian creators and diversity in the gaming community. Join hosts Agatha Chang and Daniel Kwan as they discuss gaming, genre, and representation with their guests, and occasionally argue with each other to the sound of Agatha's beloved air horn app.